Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of The Man That Will, our English longsword run through, utilizing the interpretation by Wyatt from Winnipeg Historical Fencing. Again, I'm pretty sure they're now called Wolf's Den. Either way though, my apologies. Point is, we're going off his work, and so I will be mentioning his name a couple different times. As well as there was the question of where was he getting his interpretation from, and I've actually gotten my hands on one of the books. It's Lessons of the English Longsword. I think it's by the Staccato Society. There's some good things in there as far as also just having everything written out, but I do have some disagreements as we discussed kind of last time. The way I like to do things, I'm going to stick to, but that's what we're working off of. It's just my mechanics using these lessons. So we're going to pick back up now with lesson 4, which is a lot like lesson 3. I actually like to think of them as parallels / inverses of each other. If lesson 3 was all about me driving out that way, lesson 4 is about me driving this way, in and cross to my right side. Now the way we're going to open this up is with a double hawk, and this is where things can get kind of interesting. So what is a double hawk? A double hawk here is going to be 2 hawks in sequence without a break. So essentially, the difference between doing 2 hawks is that there's pause and time for new adjustment. So for example, I do a hawk, and then I do another hawk off of that parry. Right? Or alternatively, I do a hawk, they fall away from me, so I then choose to do another hawk following them. This also could be, I throw a hawk, my opponent is stepping forward, so I'm going to throw a hawk as I step backward. Or I throw a hawk as I step forward, I'm going to throw a hawk as I step outward. Point is, there's that little pause of, what did the first one get me? Cool, fire the second one. I could take that second hawk and turn that into a roundie, turn that into a rake, turn that into a quarter blow, turn into anything else I might need to do. Double hawks, on the other hand, is I am throwing 2 hawks. That's it. Now, why would I ever choose to use this? My best approximation would be someone is giving ground, or they're attempting to give my blade a percussive beat. So, let's talk about giving ground first. The idea being that I know when I throw my first strike, my opponent's just going to skitter away. Rather than pausing and having to repower or doing a through cut that makes an opening, I will fire my hawk out and then build upon it the same way I would normally, so that there's a nice continuation. Basically, my motion doesn't stop. So 2 hawks is hawk, hawk. Double hawk looks exactly the same, except it's hawk, hawk. I am building upon it in nice rapid sequence, and the more momentum I can steal, the better. So if I'm chasing someone down, great. Alternatively, you could do this from the same side. So I could do, and I'll face this way, rather than hawk right, hawk left, this could be hawk right, hawk right. That's kind of a nice little pursuing cut, and I would absolutely still call that a double hawk. I would just call it a double hawk with the cock step, which we'll get to later today. So the way I'm going to be working this is I will be doing 2 passing steps, because I like to then set up the next couple cuts so that I can travel anywhere. So point is, for our double hawk, that will be you're cutting 2 hawks in tight sequence, 1, 2, passing forward with both cuts. So, I do those 2. My opponent parries, leaving an opening on the right side. Now's where I strike out my roundie. And about roundies, I want to talk a little bit about them because some discussion popped up in the comments last time. When I do roundies against a person, I want there to be stick. And I will explain this more when I do it against a person in the videos that'll follow this. But essentially, whenever I throw a roundie, it's meant to drive the opponent. That's what they're for, at least based upon the way they are used in all of these plays. They're meant to get your opponent to drive outward. The more I can get that to happen, the better. And so, I don't necessarily want a ton of follow-through. I want it to be, if I am throwing a roundie, so I just finished this hawk and we'll go ahead and do the next roundie, I want to make sure my opponent has to deal with all of that and the threat of turnover. While we won't be doing any turnovers in these lessons, at least so far, that threat should be there because I know it and they might know it. Anyone from a German tradition will know about Outerwinden, so why not use that threat the same way I would do it with the Zwerkau? I'm not throwing a Zwerk, but the lesson's still there. Alternatively, however, in the event my opponent falls back, what does my roundie look like? So, I throw my hawk, and I go to throw my roundie, and they just back away from me. They create space. I don't want this to be a cut that pauses halfway, nor ends up in this middle space. Because when you suddenly miss, what should you do? This is where I think we get into the whole roundies or Milanese thing. Against the air, as I said in the comments last time, I very much agree. If I see someone is falling back, rather than trying to stop myself, I'll let it continue. So what that would look like is, I'm stepping out to the side with my cut, and my opponent's going to fall away. I go ahead and let my hands turn over, which prepares me to either fire another roundie, I can fire a quarter blow, or I can bring it across to fire a hawk. Point is, doing 2 roundies against the air should look a bit like this, and I will do roundie out, roundie back, as we did in the first lesson. So, hawk, roundie out, roundie back. Just because I'm creating space, and I know I'm creating space. If, however, I have my opponent where I want them to, and I'm trying to build upon this driving action, doing through cuts will not help me here, and in fact may harm me by creating a tempo they can attack into. Again, the way I like to use them, not saying that this is 100% exactly what the interpretation or what the book was written for. It's just a way of using the mechanics. So, back to where we were. This time though, I've got my opponent where I want them, I chase them with the double hawk, locked them down, now let's build upon it. So, double hawk, now I'm going to do roundie out, but my out this way is now we're stepping inward. So the idea here is I'm going to swirl, step out with the right foot. Now I'm going to cross step to bear both feet inwards. What this is going to be, is remember last time we talked about the idea of outwards and homewards? Homewards I think you could even further translate to coming back to where you originated from. So arguably, forwards, homewards, perhaps. This way is now inwards. So if I'm stepping inwards, it's going to my right. So, I've done my first outwards, or I've done my first rather inwards, but it's in the manner of outwards. This can get very confusing very quickly. I'm now going to turn my blade over as I step with my left foot across in front, so both feet are borne in with a step. Boom. Now, if you watch Wyatt's video on this play, he likes to do it differently. He likes to start from left, cut right, cut left, cut right, so he finishes with an outer roundie. While I did pretty much the same thing the other way, I don't like it on this side, and I want to explain why. So, to compare these two plays, my 3 roundies going outward, and my 2 roundies going homeward, or inward rather. So, for my 3 roundies going outward, that's roundie out, which drives your hands across, roundie in, which is sneaky and drives your hand tight, and then this final one, roundie out again, gets me entirely around your body, and we discussed the idea of hitting between the ears, so being able to strike someone in the back of the head. This is not hard to achieve. On the same side, arguably you can do the same thing, but it doesn't quite work as well, and that's for 2 reasons. Number 1 is the majority of people you're going to fight are right-handed, and you, presumably, are also right-handed. So, there's an asymmetry here. When you're working around someone's sword side, you can get very, very tight to them. Basically, you get the benefit of being over their weakest defensive motion, and most people are not inclined to move, which is why we have to train them to do triangle steps, etc., to defend on the right side. When you're going toward your right, their left, you're always fighting against their strongest inward parries. Meaning, that first roundie is probably the scariest part of this whole thing, because you do leave yourself susceptible to counters. Fortunately, I did that double hawk and they listened to me. So then when I step across, what I'm doing is I'm making sure it's a tight cut that's forcing them to do a defense on their right side. I have a high chance of blowing through here, and if they want to try and set anything up, I'm well guarded, I'm still able to exit, and if I needed to, I could then take some examples from the first lesson and turn this into a snatch to escape, or I could turn this into a tight quarter blow to guard, or various other things. Basically, I don't like finishing on my right side with a wide cut. It doesn't drive quite the same way because of how my opponent will match me. If they were left-handed, this would be different. And so I want to make sure that I am cutting in from that left as I move this way, the same way that I cut in from the right here, but could then build upon it. Basically get 1 extra tick on your left side. This will become more apparent when I do it with a person in the follow-up videos to this, but just have it in your mind for now. That's why I go this way, along with the idea of fence not from left if right of hand. So what does our full play look like now that I've gone into exhaustive talky detailing? You probably clicked off the video. Let's go through it. That's double hawk, so boom, boom, roundy in with both feet. Now, let's talk about my footwork a little bit. I'm not looking to do a full cross step, you absolutely can, but like I discussed last time, I step out with my right foot, and I step so that my heel is kind of in line with the nub of my big toe, so not the toe itself, but the base where it attaches. This gives me plenty of strength when I cut in that I can choose to stop here, I can choose to bind here, I can also choose to spring off of here, should I desire to. If you want to turn this into a full cross step, that would be here, here, and you have the flexibility to do so, by all means do so. The biggest thing to remember though is that if you cross step like this, you can't stop. You gotta keep going. So you are vulnerable to certain things. Now, I'll show that to this side, show that to that side, then we'll move on to lesson 5 and 6 because they need to go in tandem. So, double hawk, boom, boom, roundy in, and then for sake of, let's add a little bit of a guard here. So I'll go ahead and do a couple cock steps falling back as I guard my head. Now we'll do it this way. Double hawk, roundy out, roundy in, guard. Nice and straightforward. You see how those are kind of inverse of each other? And I think it's a universal fencing principle in regards to driving around to the right, driving around to the left. It even has some certain dagger alignments that I could go into further detail about, and I may do that in its own video about dagger fighting, so I think we probably could use another one on the channel. But either way, different subject. So now let's talk about lessons 5 and 6. 5 and 6, 6 is really short and also really vague, so I'm kind of with Wyatt here in regards to combining them. So the basic idea is that lesson 5 and lesson 6 both use the idea of the cock step, which I already kind of gave away. What is the cock step in this interpretation? It's the idea of fighting off the lead foot with essentially a little advance, gather advance, I guess I could describe it. So lead foot, back foot, lead foot. Any one of those could be attacks. Generally speaking, it's going to be attack, load for attack, attack. And that could happen regardless of which foot is forward. This mimics the way that a rooster attacks things. So, the idea here is that with lesson 5, I need to provoke with a high cut, but the hawk never lands, then start jumping into roundies. So I'm kind of cutting out the middleman, as it were. Don't bother doing hawks anymore, just make them think you're going to do a hawk, and then their sides will become vulnerable to you. I find that this is a really good thing to do against people that automatically jump up into a frontale or crone-like position. Alternatively, it's good to deal with people who go into some sort of overhead guard, such as an ox, honganort, or fenestra type cover, because both of those are vulnerable to the sides. Now, how do I like to do my provocation? So again, Wyatt likes to do it from the left. I don't like doing that. I'm going to do it from the right. Now, the way I'm also going to do this is I'm not going to put my right leg forward. You could. You absolutely could do the following provocation by stepping forward with the right foot, but not casting the cut out, and some people will require you to do so. What I mean by that is not everyone responds to your feet equally. If someone's looking more at your tip, they only need the tip. If they're looking at your tip and your foot, you can do what I'm about to do. But if there's someone that requires that foot to believe you, do a very small step with your right foot as you do this provocation. But let's say we're living in my perfect world, because why not? It's my channel. And so they will respond to my tip, and my foot will just add a little bit of emphasis. So I start off ready to cut. I fire out with my tip, and I fire out with my left foot. Boom. This slight activation means that I'm not only priming myself for my next step, of which I have a couple different options, but I also haven't had to change my feet, so I'm still fighting right-handed. So, once again, provoke. Now, what do I choose to do? And I want to also, I'm overemphasizing this provoke a little bit, but it can end up this big. Now here's where you get options. You need to run rounds on their head. This is essentially, you're going to jump into doing rounding from one side to the other, to the other, to the other, and then we'll break that rhythm. You get an option here. You could roundy from the right, and I've certainly set you up to do so very powerfully, or you can choose to roundy from the left, which would generally be a little bit easier of a target area, since they're dealing with the feinted right cut. Let's go over both options. So first, the easy one, roundying from the right. This can be, again, a little bit dicier just because of where we set them up to. But the more vertical you make your provocation, depends upon what they do. So, I'm here, provoke, let's roundy from the right, so I'm going to push my pommel under my arms and step out wide to my right side so I can cut at you. Roundie. Then I'm just going to start following through with the rest of my roundies. Roundie step wide, roundie step wide, roundie step wide, roundie step wide. Alternatively, I decide to roundie from the left first. That's the way I like to do it. So I'm above, provoke, back foot comes up, roundie comes out, boom. And all that is just a little advance, keeping my left foot in front. Kind of mimics the cop step we'll do earlier. Sorry, do later rather. Provoke, roundie, 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 roundie. And I just drive them away that way. It also mimics the step that I did in lesson 3, wherein, where was that lesson 2? That was lesson 2, sorry, wherein I took their elbows from the left after provoking right. Anyway though, point is, either one of these options gets you into running rounds on their head. What does that actually mean? You don't want to do this against a stagnant opponent. Against someone that's just going to hold their ground, as soon as you've got your roundies running, work to one side or the other. That's relatively simplistic, and you already have 2 lessons that tell you how to do so. This is for someone that is just going to back up and defend. So, I get them driven from side to side to side. And again, this works against people that are either defending like this, or certainly people that are defending with some form of hanging guard. Either way, wider and wider I drive them. Now it gets into the cock step, which is essentially going to be whichever side I just cut the roundie on, my foot will be forward, my sword will be there, and I will have pulled it back, but I won't fire the roundie. So now I will just cut downward as I advance forward. Boom. Now this is the tricky part. The way I like to do this is I am doing this on the cut that never came, not a tip feint. Here's what I mean. When you're running rounds on someone's head, and this is also true if you're doing a Thurkau or Atzana, anything. If you are getting someone driven from side to side to side to side, you can provoke them with a tip. So just for sake of, side, 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 tip, side. That's fine, and if someone's paying close attention to your tip, that can work very well. Problem is, at least from what I have experienced, years of competitive HEMA and overabundance of Thurkau have gotten people really used to seeing that tip and not believing it. So instead, let us just not throw a cut. So what that would look like is side, 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 cut. I may prepare my hands, but my tip stays on this side so it can come straight back down of whatever side the lead foot is on. I find this really messes with people. It breaks everything that I have been doing up until now and costs me very little energy. Whereas actually putting my tip over there, then bringing it back, more time, more energy, more room for things to mess up. Even if you were to choose when I load but don't fire to try and cut at me, no problem. My sword and feet are lined up. So now the actual cock step itself, you can cut at either the forearm or the head. You could also do this as a thrust. Doesn't really matter. The idea being just whatever side you just cut the roundie on, load, don't step, cut with your lead foot. You can also then cut with your back foot and lead foot again. So if I cut the forearm, cut the head. Making sense? Now, as though I expected an answer from the camera. This can happen on both sides. It doesn't really matter which. I like to set it up on both, and it just feels fantastic either way. So I'll do the full play as best I can, and it should be noted you can make this go as long or short as you want. I would not recommend going more than 4 cuts, probably. That doesn't include the feint, because by that time, either you've driven someone so far, they're probably not a consideration, whatever fighting scenario you're in, or alternatively, they're going to be setting up some form of counter, so when you try this, they're well tuned into you. So for this, I will do probably either 3 or 4 cuts, depends on what side. So, I'm loaded, provocation, roundie, 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 cock, step. Now we'll do it the other way, and I'll face this way. And I'll also do my alternative footwork here. So that I did my gather left, now I'll just go ahead and do a right step. Provocation, roundie, 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 cock, step. Now, I talked about lesson 6, and I said it was kind of combined with this. I'm right there with Wyatt as well. All lesson 6 is bear off the earth, which kind of vague, but essentially he's interpreting this as guard your head. I don't disagree with that, right? And push away from the ground. 3 cock steps home to keep you out of danger. So you've done any action. This could be tacked onto every single thing you do. You've done anything that's hit the person. Lift your guard so it's above your head on either side. Whatever foot is forward, hands go up. So if I'm right foot forward when I hit, hands go up to my left. I'm left foot forward when I hit, hands go up to my right. You can also, if you really need to get some distance, let's say I am right foot forward, but I need to get away, pass back as you do so, not necessarily required though. The cock steps are just going to be 3 retreating steps. So I hit, up, 1, 2, 3. You see how much distance that covers. This I really like because it lines up exactly with the advice that I give my students. You are not safe until you are at least 3 steps away. 1 step can be hit without someone needing to move. 2 steps can be hit with them passing at you. 3 steps, by the time that sword covers that distance, you will be parrying it. Or they won't even bother taking it because it requires them to step twice to hit you. So let's just combine that onto the end of our play we just did. And for this, I'll do facing forward, then I'll do facing that way for sake of ease, and I might do either one of my feet. Footwork options, rather. So, provoke, roundy out, roundy in, roundy out, no roundy, cock step, guard, 2, 3. Now we go this way. Provoke, roundy, 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 cock step, guard, 2, 3. Nice and straightforward. So that's all that's going to be. I like the fighting off the firm foot section, essentially, is the way I would start to describe this. And I think it also is kind of starting to lean into the defensive-minded plays. 7 and 8 are where things get really, really vague and odd. And the next video, if I do it, well, so the next video will be me doing these against a person, because I feel very strong about them, and I like the way they feel, and I like to do them. And then I'll also finally get to that bit I talked about with axes. But when it comes to the last 2, I'm a little less solid on them, and so it might be a bit more out there. So if you like hearing me talk a lot as I swing a sword in an empty room, boom, keep an eye out for those on the horizon. But otherwise, though, that's the next 3 plays of The Man That Will. I really like the way these feel, and I like the mix-up that you've got. It's just building upon what you have. You have your basic combos that drive linearly but take sides, and you have your side-moving combos. And then we go from side moving back to linear. And that really does kind of cover it for between wide and narrow game. But either way though, thank you very, very much for watching, and we will go over some other techniques another time.